Hi everyone, Michael Britt here. The Psych Files podcast passed the 20 million download mark. And a lot of that success is due to my episodes on how you can use memory strategies to remember just about anything. From memorizing terms for a test to remembering people's names at a party or a meeting, I put all of these episodes into one audio course. Hippos, aliens, and llamas quickly master the tricks to a great memory. And it's available now on avid.fm/memorymaster. All one word. Hello, everyone. Time for another episode of the Psych Files. This is episode number 29. This episode is called Reading: Extrinsic versus Intrinsic versus the Motivation to Learn. So I wanted to talk about this controversy of intrinsic versus extrinsic versus a new concept you may not have heard of, which is simply the motivation to learn. Programs in the schools which reward students for reading. One of the more famous ones is called Book It. Programs that rewarded students with pizzas for reading books. And of course, there's two sides to that. Some saying that it was successful in getting students to read. Others saying that students should enjoy learning. And that, of course, is true, but how we get students to do that is a tough thing. All right, so I know that if I say to one of my kids, okay, let's just read 3 more pages, and then you can watch TV, or play video games, or go outside, or have a treat. What's going to happen, or what does happen, what has happened, is that those 3 pages are read rather quickly. So they'll just rifle through those pages because what happens is the focus has turned to the extrinsic reward. So that's basically what extrinsic means, that there's a reward coming from outside of the individual. Ice cream, money, etc., pizzas. And typically it's tied to reading a number of books. Now, the advantages to this kind of extrinsic motivation is that it's rather simple to put a program like this together. But the disadvantages is that the research has shown, there really is some strong research to show that rewarding students for doing things can really undermine their interest in doing the activity. That is, when the reward is taken away, the desire to participate in the activity seems to decline. And the first researcher to work on this would be a researcher, a psychologist, Edward DECI, which I guess is Deci, could be DC, I don't know, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. But he did a rather straightforward piece of research in which students or subjects were asked to do puzzles, and some of them did the puzzles, and they were paid to do those puzzles. Others were not. And as part of the experiment, after a period of time, there was a kind of a pause in the experiment in which the subjects had to wait, and they could do anything they wanted to during that wait time. And sure enough, the students who were paid to do the puzzles did very few puzzles. In other words, did not really continue doing the puzzles during this break time. But the students who were not paid continued to do the puzzles during that period of time. And the explanation then is that when you introduce a reward, people shift their attention to the reward. In other words, why am I doing this? Well, I'm doing it for the reward. And when there is no reward, there seems to be the desire to do it decreases. Now, there are some ways, despite this. So I'm not really a big fan then of these kinds of programs, but there are some ways to make them effective, and this is where Brophy and Good come into play. They talk a little bit about programs that are set up in such a way that in order to get the reward, you have to complete something, but you have to complete it to some specific level of quality. So, in other words, you may have to read 3 books. But you also have to write a report in which you get at least a letter grade of B. Then you get the reward. So you see that what's expected is much more than just doing it. Here, read 3 books. In which case you could just rifle through 3 books. But if you had to read the books and produce a report that has a level of quality to it, again, because you could write a report, which really wasn't that impressive. So introduce these elements, and perhaps the idea of extrinsic rewards might actually work. I think that's a good recommendation. And the other thing that these authors recommend, or at least suggest, and I agree with them, is that perhaps extrinsic rewards work best when what you want young people to do is really more a quantity rather than quality. In other words, if what you want, if you're a teacher now, I guess I'm talking to teachers here, but if you want students to do something, perhaps like a drill and practice activity, it's not really high-level thinking, it's not really originality that you're looking for, and not really depth of thinking here, but just going over the basics, then extrinsic rewards might be the way to go. But if you're looking for students to really get in, dig deeply, and think deeply about a topic, then you really are going to have to add in something like read the books, but write a report in which you get a grade of at least a B. So I think that's a good way to think about. If you really want to use extrinsic rewards, now that's what you're really going to have to face in order to make it successful. Would love to hear from you if you have experience with one of these kinds of book it type programs, these extrinsic reward programs. Let me know what you thought of it, because I have heard in the past some people think they're just great, and so I'd love to hear what you think about them in terms of what I've just said about why they're maybe ineffective. All right, so if extrinsic is not really the way to go, then most people talk about intrinsic. Let's make things intrinsically interesting, which basically means that you're going to try to find a way to make it fun. When I think we all try to do this, right? The students, when my kids come home with books, the books are usually about dinosaurs or trucks. That would be my son, or Barbie dolls. That, of course, would be my daughter. Believe me, my kids are breaking no ground when it comes to gender roles. So if it's reading, then we try to give kids something that's interesting to read, or let them choose the topic of the book. When I taught, I taught teenagers, so of course I tried to tie what I was teaching into things like attraction to the opposite sex. I knew that students would be pulled in by that, or talked about people, especially when you're talking about history or something. When you can talk about real people, then students are drawn in. So intrinsic, we all try to do it. I think generally it's a great idea. It's not always possible though, right? You may be thinking, yeah, it's a great idea. But there are some topics that students have to learn that are really not terribly interesting. And, you can only break your back so far trying to, or bend over, giving students ideas on how to make this interesting, or trying to create ways to make it interesting. Some areas of math, not all students are going to jump up and down. It's not intrinsically interesting to them, and you may not be able to find a way or think of a way to make it lots and lots of fun. Although even here, my kids come home with math homework in which they have to go around the house and measure things, find things on it that have numbers. So I don't know. We're doing our best here, but I taught history, for example, and I tried to make it fun, but there were areas of the history of psychology that, frankly, are not terribly interesting. And I sort of found it difficult to make it interesting. However, what I tried to do then was, just to end up that section, intrinsic motivation, great. Probably has a lot of advantages over the extrinsic, but not always easy to do. Here's a third concept researched by Brophy and Good, and that's called motivation to learn. And I really like it. What you're trying to do here is to stimulate people's interest in simply learning, no matter what the topic is. And I think that I agreed so much with them because there are things that draw all of us in. For example, puzzles. Puzzles draw people in. Even if you ask a question of people who really have no particular interest in the topic. For example, physics is not really my area. I remember taking it in high school and thinking, well, it's not really my thing. But I remember, have you ever heard this dilemma? No, it's not really a dilemma. It's kind of again, kind of a puzzle. Suppose you are swinging a string with a weight on the end of it. So it could be anything. Let's say it's a ball or something like this. Have you heard this one? You're swinging the string and the ball's at the end of it around your head. So it's going around and around in a circle. And then the string breaks. What happens to the ball? So you may have seen some pictures. Does it go straight out? Does it go continue straight, but in the direction it was heading in at the time? So maybe it's making a sort of it's going straight out in front of you. So if the string breaks when it's right over your right shoulder, does the ball go straight out? Does it go sort of in front of you? Does it curve around as it goes in front of you? Now, I did not know the answer to that question, and I got it wrong. I thought the ball would curve, and I was totally wrong. Apparently, the answer is that the ball will go straight out. So, in other words, it will go out. So, if the string breaks over your, let's say, your right shoulder, the ball will continue to go straight out as if you're holding your arm straight out. I guess that would be parallel to your body. But the question itself drew me in. And that's just a natural phenomenon about our minds. We are drawn toward puzzles. And to the extent that we can use this. We can draw people in by tapping into that. Let me give you a couple other examples. What would happen if you went outside your spacecraft without a suit? Those of you who are old enough may remember a couple of movies which displayed the result here completely differently. In the movie 2001, A Space Odyssey, one of my favorite movies, you remember there was a scene where that wasn't Commander Bowman, right? It was the other guy, I think. Anyway, one of them blasted out of his little spacecraft there, and he didn't have a helmet on. And, he was weightless, of course, but he lived through the experience. In another movie, James Bond movie called Moonraker, you may remember this one, less popular maybe, but took place in space, of course, and there were a couple of scenes where, much of the heart of that movie was based around the belief that if you went out into space and let's say you had your space suit on, but your helmet broke and you would blow up. And so they had scenes. They must have wanted to do this just for the special effect. They had people, their bodies exploded. Well, as it turns, so that's a good question, right? If you go outside your spacecraft, are you going to blow up? Because there's no pressure outside. But there are pressures inside your body. If you're curious, the answer to this, and I know this is right because the venerable, though now deceased, author and scientist Isaac Asimov chimed in on this and said that no, the pressures inside your body are simply not strong enough to force you to blow up in space. All right, but it's an interesting question. Now, here's another sort of puzzle. This past summer, I saw a movie, maybe you did too, called The Bourne Supremacy. Now, I've seen all three of these, and I liked all three of them. This last one was really pretty good. So they're all good. Now, what is it about these movies that really pull you in? Well, here's the idea. You wake up, you don't know where you are, and you don't know who you are, but you seem to have the ability to kill people. And for another reason, people seem to be out to kill you. Why is that? Now, that premise is still working, actually, through three movies. It is. That's an interesting puzzle. Why would that be? What is there about what I did? So, whether it's about teaching in the classroom or physics, space or the Bourne Supremacy, we are just really captured by those questions. And we can use those, I think, more effectively even than the extrinsic or intrinsic to just excite our interest in learning. A couple other examples. In addition to puzzles, interesting questions. You can pull people in. Here's an interesting question. Why did the dinosaurs die out? Now, most of us have heard about the meteor and all that, but that's kind of, why aren't there dinosaurs around? That's kind of a good question that can get students in on that, although dinosaurs pull most students in because they're big and ferocious and all that. How about this? Another great movie was Apollo 13. This came out about 10 years ago. Do you remember the scene where the astronauts were you're stranded in space? This was real. And so this guy walks into a room with a bunch of other scientists around, and there was a part in the spacecraft that wasn't working. And so he comes in and he says, all right, everybody, we have to make one of these, and he holds it up, out of, and then he dumps a bag of parts onto the table. And he says, out of this. So apparently they knew the part that they had to create or to fix, and they asked the astronauts, what do you have at your disposal? And then put all that, and then that back on Earth, put that in the bag, threw it on a table, and said, how are we going to do this? That, and to me, that's ideal, right? How do you make this out of this? Perfect, ideal. There's a very interesting, and it reminds me of another thing, another interesting book. I think it's by the author's name is Langer, Langer, called Mindfulness. And she has an interesting example, too. It's an open-ended question. It's not dissimilar from this. What she says is that we should ask questions like, how could you? How could you do this? Instead of, can you? So if I say, to these scientists, hey, by the way, can we make one of these out of this bag of parts? Or if you ask students, can you do this? People, it's too easy for us to say, no, you can't. But if you phrase the question as, how could you? How could you make this out of that? And I think the example she used is, instead of asking students, can you make a birth control pill that could be inhaled through the nose? Pretty sure that was her example because it stuck in my head. Now, of course, the answer to that question would be, oh man, what are you, crazy? That's silly. No, of course you can't. But what if you phrased it this way? How could you make a birth control pill that could be inhaled through the nose? Now that makes people go, well, how could you do that? Well, I don't know. Let's see. Well, once we go through your nose, we got to look into, what the nose, what does it really absorb? Where does it go? Right? It sort of stimulates the thought processes when you ask in an open-ended way. Pretty neat idea. Other things that grab us and pull us in are contradictions. There was a previous episode of the Psych Files called Opposites Attract versus Birds of a Feather Flock Together. Those are two sayings that contradict each other. And if you ask people, hey, which one of these is true? Well, let's see here. Birds of a feather, that is true. Opposites attract. Well, that's true too. Contradictions pull us in. Controversy pulls us in. Did we really land on the moon? Now, of course, I happen to have been around at the time, but there are people out there. Go to YouTube and ask that question, and you'll find stuff. There are people who question that whole thing. Well, I don't question it, but examining it, because they say, well, if that picture was really taken on the moon, why is the shadow this way, and why isn't it supposed to be over that way? Well, if you were teaching math and you were teaching angles, you might be able to use this, this controversy as a way to pull students in. Because if you say to them, gee, that's an interesting question that this person asked. Why is the angle of the sun over that way? How are we going to answer that question? I think you could use that if you were teaching math. I wanted to alert you to a really cool site. Talk about getting students excited. There is an organization, a company in the UK called Future Labs. www.futurelab, one word, .org.uk. I'll have a link to it on the website. And they do some really cool stuff. They've got this project called Space Mission Ice Moon. They pull students in with this fictional problem of astronauts on the moon who are running out of air. And so they only have so much time to get the information together that these astronauts need in order to survive. So you pull students in with suspense. If we don't solve this, they'll die. Now, they know it's fictional, but that doesn't matter. There's something about there being a time limit to things, and that there could be some negative consequences. That pulls kids in. Finally, kids love to guess, and especially if there's no public embarrassment for guessing, and setting things up in ways in which students can sort of, hey, what do you think's going to happen? And they go, well, it could be this, it could be that. I mean, it can make things fun and interesting. All right. All of these techniques are what Good and Brophy call the motivation to learn. It's natural phenomenon processes of our brains which excite them and get them going. Puzzles, questions, problems, open-ended questions, contradictions, controversy, suspense. All of these things excite our curiosity. One last thing, remember to check out my memory course. You can use these strategies to get better grades on your tests, to remember people's names, and even help you to remember those jokes you keep forgetting. So you will be amazed. avid.fm/memorymaster. That's avid, AVID.fm/memorymaster. Thanks.